In 1999, 9-year-old Sophie vanished from her front yard, her chalk drawings still fresh on the driveway, her sandals left on the steps. 16 years of silence followed until her godmother Elaine stumbled onto a forgotten photo. In the corner stood a man no one had ever questioned, always lingering at the edge of search crowds, always near a pale sedan. Elaine's search led her to a crumbling house on the outskirts of town. Inside, a wall of photographs with Sophie's face circled in red. What Elaine uncovered was far more than a disappearance. It was a secret too horrific to explain. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support means the world and helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Stick with us until the end, and if this mystery moves you, share your thoughts in the comments and pass it along to a friend. The year was 1999, and the small suburban street felt safe, almost frozen in time. Kids rode their bikes in circles, sprinklers hissed across trimmed lawns, and the air carried that sticky warmth of late summer. Neighbors leaned over fences, swapping stories while laundry swayed lazily on backyard lines. Among them was little Sophie, just 9 years old, with dark hair tied in ribbons that bounced as she skipped across the front yard. She was the kind of child everyone noticed, not because she demanded attention, but because of her easy laughter. The way she waved to passing cars like each driver was a lifelong friend. That day had been no different. She'd been playing with chalk, drawing crooked stars and flowers on the driveway, her bare feet dusted white. Her parents were inside, preparing dinner, windows open to the sound of her giggles. The godmother, Elaine, who lived 2 streets away, had promised to stop by later with cookies fresh out of the oven. It was the kind of day that should have slipped into memory unnoticed, ordinary, harmless, forgettable. Yet those are the days that burn themselves into history, because of what came after. Neighbors remembered seeing Sophie near the mailbox, crouched low, inspecting a caterpillar crawling along the curb. A few recalled her waving at a car that passed slowly down the street. Others admitted they barely noticed at all, until the screaming started. By nightfall, Sophie was gone. The chalk drawings remained, rainbows and hearts scrawled in fading colors. Her small pink sandals were still near the steps. But the little girl who made the street feel alive had vanished, leaving nothing but silence heavy enough to drown out the crickets. And that silence would stretch not just through the night, but for 16 long years. It began with something so small, no one thought twice at first. Sophie's mother called her in for dinner, voice drifting through the open window. No answer. She stepped outside, wiping her hands on a dish towel, expecting to see her daughter crouched near the mailbox or chasing fireflies. The yard was empty. The sandals were still on the steps. The chalk drawings ended mid-scribble. Sophie's little bucket of crayons lay tipped over, colors scattered across the grass. A chill ran through her mother, the kind that whispers before the mind dares to form the thought. Neighbors heard her voice shift, no longer casual, but sharp, urgent. "Sophie? Sophie?" Windows opened, doors swung wide. People stepped onto porches, curious at first, then uneasy. Her father ran down the street, scanning yards, calling her name louder each time, chest heaving. A few kids mentioned seeing her near the curb. One man thought he'd glimpsed her waving at a car, but the memory was hazy, wrapped in guilt. By dusk, the laughter of summer was gone. Flashlights flickered in every yard, parents gripping their children's hands tighter. The word no one wanted to say yet hung in the air, pressing in on every frantic breath. Sophie wasn't just late for dinner. She was gone. The street transformed overnight from a quiet row of houses into a command post. Police cruisers lined the curbs, their lights washing the trees in blue and red. Neighbors handed out flashlights. Volunteers trudged through yards and hedges, voices calling Sophie's name over and over until it blurred into a desperate chant. Officers canvassed door to door, knocking on every porch, asking the same questions. When did you last see her? Was anyone parked outside? Did you notice a car you didn't recognize? Each no only deepened the pit in everyone's stomachs. By midnight, the local park was swept. Dogs were brought in, noses pressed to Sophie's sandals, straining against their leashes as they tracked scents through the grass. But the trail fizzled out near the corner where the mailbox stood. Just ended, as though Sophie had been lifted right off the street. People whispered, sometimes too loud. Could she have run away? One neighbor muttered. At 9 years old? Another scoffed. Someone else swore they saw a pale sedan driving slow earlier in the evening. Another remembered a man walking a little too close to the yard. Every memory twisted into suspicion. Her godmother Elaine arrived at dawn, eyes red, clutching a tray of cookies she'd baked hours earlier. They sat untouched on the porch while she pressed her hand to the chalk-dusted concrete, where Sophie's drawing still glowed faintly in the morning light. The search expanded over the next days. Woods combed, rivers dragged, posters stapled to poles. The community, once lively, began to feel like a stage set, every face carrying guilt for what they hadn't noticed. And through it all, Sophie's voice never answered back. Inside the house, silence became unbearable. Sophie's room stayed untouched, her bed neatly made, stuffed animals lined along the window. Her mother sat there for hours, rocking in the chair, whispering her daughter's name like a prayer. Her father grew restless, pacing the hallway, snapping at officers when updates slowed, his grief spilling out as anger. Elaine, the godmother, moved quietly through the rooms, filling gaps no one else could. She cooked meals that went uneaten, folded blankets no one touched, answered phone calls when her sister-in-law couldn't bring herself to pick up. Yet she felt the sideways glances, neighbors muttering that she seemed too calm, too involved. "Why is she always there?" someone whispered behind her back. Blaine crept in like mold. Was the yard too unguarded? Should someone have been watching closer? Each question tore at the family, leaving them brittle, raw. They clung to hope in daylight, but by night it dissolved into sobs, muffled by walls too thin to contain them. And Elaine quietly made a promise. If the police failed, she would never stop looking. The first weeks were frantic, every hour alive with searches, interviews, and tips. But soon the momentum thinned. Posters curled in the rain, the ink running down into black streaks. The hotline rang less each day, and when it did, the calls were wild guesses. Sightings of a girl at a gas station 3 towns over, a child seen at a mall. Each lead unraveled into nothing. The police presence shrank. Squad cars that once circled the block now came by only for brief check-ins. Detectives spoke with the heavy tones of men carrying a case already slipping away. "We'll keep it open," they promised, but their eyes betrayed fatigue. In town, theories festered. Some blamed strangers passing through. Others muttered it had to be someone local. "People don't just vanish," one man said at the grocery store. "Not unless someone around here knows more than they're saying." Whispers grew sharper. Names tossed around like knives. The family bore the brunt of it. Her father was accused of knowing more than he let on. Her mother was criticized for not watching close enough. Even Elaine, the godmother, found herself under suspicion. A pair of neighbors whispered as she walked past. "Why is she still hanging around?" one asked. "Maybe she's hiding something," the other replied. The weight of suspicion pressed as heavily as grief. Doors shut earlier at night, curtains stayed drawn, and the yard where Sophie once played, alive with chalk and laughter, grew overgrown, as if the earth itself was trying to cover the memory. By the end of that first year, hope was no longer loud. It lived only in hushed voices and sleepless prayers. The seasons changed, but the absence never did. Each birthday, Sophie's mother baked a cake and left it untouched on the kitchen table, candles flickering before being blown out in silence. Her father grew thinner, shoulders stooped, retreating into long shifts and longer nights with the bottle. Their home felt less like a house and more like a mausoleum. Neighbors moved on. The posters came down, sidewalks filled again with children's laughter, though parents watched them with sharper eyes. What had once been daily talk turned into a story told only in murmurs. Remember the girl from '99? Only Elaine refused to let Sophie's name fade. She kept a box in her living room, posters, news clippings, even her goddaughter's last drawing she'd rescued from the rain. Each year, she called the detectives, pushing for updates. Most times, the line went quiet, the answers clipped, no new leads. 16 years passed like that, grief calcified into silence for most. But for Elaine, it remained an open wound she refused to let scar over. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, 16 years later, when Elaine was cleaning out her attic. Dust hung in the air, catching the thin stripes of sunlight through the small window. She tugged open a box she hadn't touched in years, the one she'd labeled Sophie. Inside were the clippings, the posters, the crayon drawing of a crooked house Sophie had made for her. But wedged between the papers was something she didn't remember saving. A folded flyer, newer than the rest, edges crisp. It wasn't from the original search. It was recent. A missing person notice someone had printed and slipped into her mailbox years after the case had gone cold. The photo on it stopped her heart. It was digitally aged, showing what Sophie might look like as a teenager. The eyes, those same wide, curious eyes, stared back at her. Elaine sat on the floor, gripping the paper with trembling hands. Who had left it for her? Why only her? The police had never shared this image publicly. Whispers returned to her, the ones she'd overheard years earlier. Neighbors muttering, "She's too invested. Maybe she knows more." Back then, they'd cut like knives. Now, they almost felt like clues. Something about this flyer told her Sophie's story wasn't finished. Someone out there still knew something, and Elaine realized with a jolt of clarity that if the police wouldn't chase it, she would. Elaine didn't march into the police station. She knew better. After years of clipped answers, she understood the case was nothing more than a dusty folder to them. Instead, she began small, retracing the places Sophie had once filled with laughter. She stood at the old yard, now quiet, grass grown over where chalk once stained the driveway. Neighbors who had lived there then were mostly gone, replaced by new families who avoided her questions politely, almost nervously. Those few who remembered looked uneasy when she pressed, shrugging, glancing at the ground, muttering, "It's been so long, maybe best left alone." At the grocery store, whispers trailed her again. "That's the godmother, still asking," one voice said. 16 years, and she won't stop. Elaine ignored it. She felt closer now than she had in over a decade, as if tugging a thread no one else dared touch. That flyer hadn't appeared by accident. Someone wanted her to keep looking, and she wasn't about to let the silence swallow Sophie a second time. When Elaine finally brought the flyer to the police, their reaction was colder than she expected. A detective barely glanced at it before sliding it back across the desk. "These circulate online sometimes," he said flatly. "Not official." His tone carried a warning. "Drop it. Don't stir this up again." But Elaine noticed the flicker in his eyes, the quick way he shut the folder. He knew something. Back in town, doors closed faster when she knocked. Old neighbors who once shared casseroles with Sophie's parents now avoided Elaine's gaze, muttering that it was unhealthy, that digging up the past wouldn't help anyone. At the diner, she overheard two men whisper, "She's going to stir trouble again." The other replied, "Maybe that's why they never told her everything." The more she pressed, the more she felt it. Fear. Not disinterest, not fatigue, but genuine fear. People weren't just tired of Sophie's case. They were avoiding it, protecting themselves from it. Walking home one evening, Elaine paused at the corner near the old mailbox where Sophie was last seen. The wind carried the faint squeak of a swing from a yard down the street, eerily out of place in the stillness. For a moment she felt watched, though the street was empty. Something about Sophie's disappearance had been buried deeper than the case file, and Elaine was certain now. Someone wanted it to stay that way. One evening, Elaine sat at her kitchen table with Sophie's old box of clippings spread wide, every yellowed page lit by a single lamp. She wasn't looking for anything new, just retracing steps, letting her mind drift over details. That's when she noticed it. A photo from the original search, neighbors gathered in front of Sophie's house, detectives in the yard. In the far corner, almost cropped out, stood a man she didn't recognize. Not a neighbor, not family. He was watching the scene, half turned toward the camera, his face shadowed by the brim of a cap. Curious, she compared it to another clipping. There he was again, this time further back, behind the crowd near the police tape. Always on the edge, always watching. Her heart kicked hard. In all these years, no one had mentioned him. No report noted his presence. But Elaine's gut told her he wasn't a bystander. And just like that, the silence cracked. The past wasn't finished with her. Elaine couldn't shake the man's image. She clipped the photos side by side and stared at them until the ink blurred. Same posture, same cap, same distant stare. Always just far enough away not to be questioned, but close enough to see everything. She started asking, quietly at first. Old neighbors, shopkeepers who'd been around in '99. Most shook their heads, claiming they didn't remember. A few hesitated, eyes darting before muttering. Maybe a volunteer? Hard to say. At the library, Elaine dug through microfilm archives of local papers. And there he was again, in a crowd shot from the third day of the search, barely visible at the edge of the frame. No name, no mention, just a shadow in plain sight. The unease gnawed at her. This wasn't coincidence. Whoever he was, he'd been there from the start, watching as the community unraveled. That night, Elaine spread the photos across her table, fingers trembling as she traced the outline of his face. The house creaked, the fridge hummed, and still she felt the weight of eyes on her. For the first time in years, she was certain Sophie's disappearance hadn't been random. Someone had been standing in the crowd, silent, as if guarding a secret too dark to name. And now Elaine was dragging it back into the light. It started small. A phone call that rang once, then cut off when Elaine answered. A car idling too long outside her house before pulling away when she stepped onto the porch. At first she told herself it was coincidence, tricks of her nerves. But the timing was too sharp. At the diner, she noticed conversations hush when she walked in. One man muttered just loud enough for her to catch. "She's stirring it up again. She should have let it be." Another replied, "Not safe to keep poking around." One evening, when she returned home from the library, she found the box of Sophie's clippings on the floor. Papers scattered, though she knew she hadn't left them that way. A window latch hung loose, though nothing had been taken. Someone had been inside. Elaine stood frozen in her living room, her heart pounding. Whoever left that flyer in her attic wasn't the only one watching her now. And she realized something chilling. Asking questions wasn't just unwelcome. It was dangerous. Elaine refused to be scared off. If someone was rattling her, it meant she was close. She returned to the library, poring over every archived photo from the summer of '99. Then she found it. Buried in the back pages of a local paper, a shot of volunteers assembling before a search. Among them, faces she knew. But standing at the far edge, leaning against a tree, was the man in the cap. Unlike the others, he wasn't wearing the bright armbands issued to searchers. No flashlight, no gear. Just his watchful eyes. Her stomach twisted. He hadn't been part of the effort. He'd been circling it. Digging further, she noticed something else. Behind him, barely visible, was a car. A pale sedan, its license plate blurred but distinctive with a dented bumper. Memory hit her like ice water. Back in '99, hadn't one neighbor mentioned a pale sedan driving slow past the yard? Dismissed at the time, buried under hundreds of useless tips. Now here it was, parked right behind the man who had lingered in every frame. Elaine sat back in her chair, breath ragged, palms slick with sweat. The man wasn't just a shadow. He had been there the night Sophie vanished. And he hadn't gone far. After finding the photo, Elaine couldn't shake the feeling that eyes trailed her everywhere. At the grocery store, she caught sight of a pale sedan idling in the corner of the lot. When she glanced again, it was gone. Walking home one evening, she swore she heard footsteps a beat behind her own, quickening when she did, only to vanish when she turned. Sleep grew thin. The creak of her floorboards at night set her nerves on edge, each sound amplified into threat. She began double-checking locks, pulling curtains tight, keeping Sophie's clippings close as if they were a shield. Whispers in town thickened. She should stop. One woman murmured at church. She'll end up just like Sophie, another whispered back. Elaine felt the sting, but beneath it all, something deeper. They weren't mocking her. They were warning her. Whoever had taken Sophie wasn't just a shadow of the past. They were still here, and now they knew Elaine was on their trail. Elaine's hands shook as she laid the photos in order across her kitchen table. Frame by frame, the man seemed to orbit Sophie's disappearance, always nearby, always in the background. And that pale sedan dented bumper, same angle in two separate shots. It wasn't just coincidence. She dug into DMV records, old public directories, anything she could find tied to vehicles from that era. After weeks of cross-referencing, one name surfaced, attached to a pale sedan registered just blocks away from Sophie's home in 1999. The owner had since moved, address listed as unknown. The name wasn't familiar to Elaine, but when she asked around quietly, people reacted strangely. Some went pale, others turned defensive. One man muttered, "Don't bring that up. We don't talk about him." That night, as she sat staring at the name scrawled on her notepad, the weight of it pressed heavy. She could feel the walls of the story closing in, each piece snapping into place. Sophie's disappearance hadn't been random. It hadn't been bad luck. Someone had orchestrated it and lived among them while the town tore itself apart searching. Elaine realized with a cold certainty she was no longer chasing rumors. She was on the edge of the truth, and the truth was far darker than she'd ever imagined. Elaine carried the man's name like a stone in her pocket, heavy and undeniable. She found an old address scribbled in the margin of a utility record, a run-down property on the far side of town. When she drove past, the house stood half-collapsed, weeds swallowing the porch, windows boarded. Empty, or so it seemed. As she sat in her car, engine ticking, a cold unease settled over her. Curtains that shouldn't have moved shifted slightly, as if someone had been watching her from inside. Elaine's chest tightened. She pressed the gas and drove away, but the image followed her, those invisible eyes peering through the boards. That night, she caught her reflection in the window and barely recognized herself. Sleepless eyes, lips drawn tight. The box of Sophie's things lay open on the table, papers spilling like an open wound. Elaine knew she was closer than ever, but closer meant risk. Real, tangible risk. Whoever this man was, he hadn't forgotten. And he wasn't finished. The breakthrough came not from police files, but from an overlooked box in the basement of the town library. Elaine had gone there countless times, but this day she asked for archives of property inspections near Sophie Street in 1999. Dusty folders were wheeled out, most brittle with age, half forgotten. Flipping through, one thin envelope slid free. Inside was a set of photographs taken during a zoning inspection that same summer. Her heart thudded as she scanned them. Ordinary shots of fences, mailboxes, houses. Then her breath caught. In one photo, just across from Sophie's yard, the pale sedan was parked on the curb. The same dented bumper. The same angle she had traced in other pictures. And standing beside it, clearer than ever, was the man in the cap. This time, his face wasn't shadowed. Elaine stared at the image until her pulse roared in her ears. This wasn't rumor or suggestion anymore. This was proof. He had been there. Not once, not twice, but over and over, orbiting Sophie's last moments like a vulture circling its prey. Her hands trembled as she tucked the photo back into the envelope. A chill seeped into her bones. Finding this meant she wasn't just brushing against the truth, she was holding it in her hands. And if she could find it, so could he. Elaine kept the envelope clutched tight as she drove home, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds. Twice, she caught the glint of headlights trailing too close. By the third turn, the car was gone, but her hands stayed white-knuckled on the wheel. When she reached her house, the porch light was already on. Strange, she never left it lit in the daytime. Her stomach dropped as she stepped inside. The box of Sophie's things, which she'd left neatly stacked, was overturned across the floor. Pages scattered, photo clippings torn. On the table, placed neatly in the center, lay the flyer, the one that had reignited her search. Only this time, words were scrawled across it in thick black ink. Stop. Elaine's breath hitched. This wasn't subtle anymore. Whoever she was circling had noticed her, and they were no longer content with whispers and shadows. She wasn't just looking into Sophie's disappearance anymore. She was standing directly in its path. Elaine didn't go to the police. She knew by now they would only stall, bury, or warn her off. Instead, she clutched the photo of the man by the pale sedan and drove back to the crumbling house on the edge of town. The place seemed abandoned, but up close it reeked of damp wood and something sharper, metallic. The boards over the windows rattled in the wind. Her flashlight beam swept across the yard, catching tire ruts pressed into the mud. Fresh, too fresh for a house meant to be empty. Heart pounding, she circled to the back, where the porch sagged under her weight. A rusted door half hung from its hinges. She pushed it open, the screech of metal on wood echoing into the hollow dark. Inside, dust and mildew clung to every surface, yet signs of life broke through. An ashtray filled with recent butts, a mug on the counter still faintly stained with coffee. And then she saw it. Pinned to the wall above a desk were photographs, faded, curling at the edges. Some from the original search in '99, others more recent. Crowds, streets, faces, and in the center, circled in red ink, was Sophie's school portrait. Elaine's knees buckled. This wasn't rumor or theory anymore. The man hadn't just been there. He had kept her memory, tracked it, almost cherished it in his twisted way. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Elaine froze, every muscle tight. She wasn't alone. The creak above her head came again, slow, deliberate, like weight shifting across old wood. Elaine's breath caught. She backed toward the door, every step groaning louder than she wanted. Her flashlight shook in her hand, the beam jittering across the wall of photos. Then another sound. A cough, low, raspy, close. Panic surged. She spun and bolted through the doorway, nearly stumbling on the sagging steps. Branches clawed her arms as she tore through the overgrown yard, the beam of her flashlight bouncing wildly. Behind her, the porch boards groaned, too heavy to be wind. She didn't stop until she reached her car, fumbling the keys, hands slick with sweat. The engine roared to life just as she caught a shadow moving across the upstairs window. A figure, still, watching. Elaine slammed the gas, gravel spitting beneath her tires. She didn't look back again, not until she reached the lights of town. Only then did her chest loosen, though the image of that house and its silent watcher stayed etched behind her eyes. She had escaped. But only just. Elaine didn't sleep that night. The image of the wall full of photographs burned into her mind, Sophie's school picture circled in red like a cruel trophy. She knew she couldn't keep this to herself. Not anymore. At dawn, she returned, not to the house, but to the police station. She carried the envelope with the photo of the man by the pale sedan, and she forced her trembling hands to place it on the desk of the very detective who had once dismissed her. He skimmed the image, his face stiffening. But Elaine didn't stop. She told them everything. The house, the photographs, the cigarette butts still fresh, the wall of faces. Her words tumbled out, breathless but sharp, until the detective raised a hand. He wouldn't say much, only that they'd look into it. Later that week, unmarked cars rolled quietly toward the crumbling house. Neighbors whispered of officers moving in and out, boxes carried to vans, faces pale under the weight of what they'd found inside. Rumors swirled, other photographs, other names, other children. The official statement was thin. Evidence recovered in connection to the disappearance of Sophie Miller, 1999. But Elaine knew. She had stood in that house, seen the shrine, felt the presence of a man who had hovered over their lives for 16 years. Her goddaughter's fate was no longer just mystery. It was a wound carved open with proof too dark to deny. And yet, there were still pieces missing. Even after the raid, no one in town spoke freely. The official files were sealed, names redacted, reports hushed. Sophie's parents received no closure, only a box of belongings, and the vague assurance that progress had been made. Elaine, though, carried the truth. She had seen the wall, the photographs, the circle around Sophie's face. She knew her goddaughter hadn't just vanished. She'd been marked, chosen by someone who walked among them unnoticed. The town moved on, but whispers lingered. Some swore they saw the pale sedan again, parked near the woods. Others claimed the man in the cap was never actually caught. And on quiet nights, parents clutched their children closer, uneasy without knowing why. 16 years of silence had led to a discovery too horrific to explain. And for Elaine, one question still clawed at her. Had she uncovered the truth too late, or had she only opened the door to something even darker? 16 years after Sophie vanished, Elaine uncovered proof no one else dared to see. But was the truth revealed, or just buried deeper? What do you think really happened that night? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more chilling stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark.